What if the most powerful person in the room is the one who says nothing at all? In a world addicted to noise, performance, and validation, what happens when someone refuses to play? Nietzsche didn't admire those who shouted. He feared the one who waited, silent, still, and unstoppable. They don't fear your silence because it's empty. They fear it because it sees, because it watches, unblinking. Because it pierces through facades and refuses to play along with the performance. We live in a world addicted to noise, a culture where shouting is seen as strength and performance is mistaken for presence. Voices compete, not for meaning, but for validation, applause, and power. But there is a different kind of presence, a kind of person who holds power without needing to announce it. They don't interrupt, they don't react, they simply listen, they observe, and they wait. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." And silence, true silence, is a kind of flight, not because it is passive, but because it transcends. And that's what terrifies people, not the absence of words, but the presence of someone who doesn't need them. This is what we call dangerous silence. And once you understand it, you will never be underestimated again. In today's world, loudness is often mistaken for power. We've been taught that the louder voice wins the room, the bolder comment rules the feed, the most expressive person gets the spotlight. But Nietzsche saw through that illusion. To him, true power didn't shout. It didn't seek applause. It didn't perform. It sat quietly in the back of the room, watching, calculating, waiting. While the world celebrated noise, Nietzsche admired the dangerously silent, those who do not chase attention, who don't need to explain themselves, who remain unreadable. Why? Because that kind of silence isn't emptiness, it's self-mastery, it's presence without performance. And that unsettles people more than any outburst ever could. You see, society has a formula. Speak to be seen, perform to be valued. But what happens when someone walks through life refusing to play that game? What happens when a person doesn't chase validation, doesn't rush to defend their name, doesn't flinch at being misunderstood? That person terrifies the crowd. Because you can't control someone who doesn't crave your approval. You can't overpower someone who's already conquered themselves. Nietzsche understood this. He envisioned the rise of a new kind of human, one who doesn't fit in, but rises above. The Übermensch, a being of silence and steel, unshakable, unapologetic, not because he's loud, but because he doesn't need to be. And in this video, we're going to explore Nietzsche's radical philosophy of strength. We'll break down the power of stillness, how silence reveals truth, commands, fear, and turns a single individual into a force no one can predict. From the will to power, to the death of ego. You'll discover why the quietest ones are often the most dangerous, and more importantly, how you can become one of them. Because in a world that never shuts up, it's the one who says nothing, who is remembered most. Scroll through your social media feed. What do you see? A sea of people shouting into the digital void through selfies, hashtags, outrage, hot takes, and curated performances. Everyone is trying to be seen. Everyone is trying to be liked, but no one is really listening. It's a global stage of endless noise. But to Nietzsche, this wasn't progress. It was decay. Not a display of strength, but a symptom of something much deeper. Spiritual collapse. He saw it coming over a century ago, a future where people would trade truth for applause, where they would choose comfort over meaning, where the pursuit of greatness would be replaced by the obsession with being liked. He called this kind of Human the last man. The last man isn't evil. He's not monstrous. He's something more dangerous. He's safe. He avoids discomfort. He avoids conflict. He avoids depth. He seeks pleasure, popularity, and comfort above all else. And today, the last man is everywhere. Tweets his outrage. He filters his image. He consumes endlessly and posts constantly, thinking he's free. But in reality, he's trapped. Trapped in the prison of public opinion, chained to the noise, addicted to validation. Nietzsche believed most people fear silence, not because it's boring, but because silence forces you to meet yourself. And when your entire identity is built on being seen, liked, and affirmed, being alone with your thoughts becomes unbearable. That's why stillness feels awkward. That's why someone who's unreadable feels unsettling, because the one who doesn't react, the one who doesn't post, doesn't overshare, becomes a mirror. And most people can't stand to look in that mirror. They would rather drown in the noise than face the truth in the silence. In this world of endless performance, those who are quiet are misunderstood. They're called arrogant, cold, awkward, antisocial. But Nietzsche would say, that's because the herd does not understand strength. It only understands attention. The silent individual threatens the herd because he cannot be categorized. He does not perform. He does not beg. He does not play the game. And so the herd turns on him. It attacks what it cannot control. But Nietzsche admired this person, the one who walks alone, not because they're outcast, but because they refuse to shrink just to be accepted. To him, true power lies in the person who can endure isolation. The one who doesn't need applause to feel real. Because when your identity is not built on validation, you become untouchable. So in a society obsessed with being seen, the most terrifying person is the one who does not care if you're looking. Because Nietzsche's version of strength doesn't match what society celebrates. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's not reactive. It doesn't dominate conversations or flood timelines with opinions. Real strength, Nietzsche believed, is quiet. It observes. It waits. And when it finally acts, it strikes with terrifying precision at ET. The center of Nietzsche's philosophy is a figure, often misunderstood, the Übermensch. He's not a ruthless tyrant, not some alpha male, and not someone obsessed with power. The Übermensch is someone who has transcended the moral codes of the herd. He lives beyond good and evil, not because he's immoral, but because he has created his own values. To do that, he must first walk alone. He doesn't speak to be heard. He doesn't explain to be understood. He doesn't chase attention because he doesn't need to be seen. He simply is, grounded, inward, purposeful. His silence is not emptiness. It is fullness, contained power, deliberate stillness. In a culture addicted to reaction, where outrage travels faster than thought, silence becomes a signal, not of absence, but of depth. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." That why, that internal compass, is what anchors the silent archetype. He does not move with trends. He is not swept away by outrage. He does not dissolve into groupthink. He is rooted in something deeper, a personal code, a mission, a quiet, unshakable truth. And because of this, he becomes unreadable, unpredictable, unmoved. People fear what they can't explain. They fear what they can't control. So when someone does not perform, does not flinch, does not fight for visibility, society calls them cold, arrogant, dangerous, even inhuman. But Nietzsche would say, that's the point. The silent archetype doesn't engage in petty battles to feel important. He doesn't gossip to feel connected. He doesn't bark when provoked just to prove he's alive, because true power is not reactive, it's sovereign. He walks into a room and says nothing, and yet his presence shakes the shallow, because the shallow need noise to survive, and in silence, truth echoes. Now contrast this figure with his opposite, the reactive man, the one who must always speak to feel heard, the one who must win arguments to feel smart, the one who surrounds himself with endless validation to escape the hollowness within. This man is not powerful, he is terrified. He hides behind noise because he cannot face what silence would reveal, the void inside him. Nietzsche's silent archetype has already walked through that void. He's not broken by it, he's sharpened by it. He chooses solitude, not because he was rejected, but because he would rather be alone than sell his soul to belong, and that's what makes him terrifying. In a world built on performance, he chooses substance. In a world obsessed with attention, he chooses depth. In a world begging for reaction, he chooses stillness. This is the man Nietzsche admired, not the conqueror, not the influencer, not the echo of the masses, but the one who walks his own path, unshaken, unmoved, because he's already conquered himself. This is the silent archetype. This is the proto-Übermensch, and this is why Nietzsche's most dangerous man does not scream. He watches, he waits, and when he moves, the world listens. Silence is not the absence of something. It is a presence, a mirror, a force that reflects everything others try to hide. So when you walk into a room and choose silence, you don't disappear, you disrupt. Because most people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for control. Control over how they are perceived. Control over how others respond. Control over the narrative. But silence removes that control. It denies them the comfort of knowing where you stand. And in that uncertainty, they see themselves, raw, unfiltered, unprepared. And that's why Nietzsche believed silence was a form of power. When you withhold words, you don't just conserve energy. You deny others the illusion that they understand you, and people fear what they can't interpret. They fear what they can't predict. They fear what they can't manipulate. Because most conversations today, they're not true dialogues. They are performances. Two egos battling for attention. Each one trying to impress, dominate, or gain approval. But when one person stays silent, the entire performance collapses. Why? Because silence is a mirror. And it shows people how much noise they actually need just to feel alive. Have you ever made eye contact with someone? Who couldn't hold it? Who grew uncomfortable while you stayed completely calm? Or said nothing, and watched their anxiety slowly build? That's not weakness. That's power through restraint. As Nietzsche might say, you terrify them not because you speak, but because you won't. Because your silence suggests something far more unsettling. You don't need their approval. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to be seen. And in a world where validation is currency, that makes you unfathomably rich. Let's go deeper. Psychologically, silence does something radical. It strips away social armor. Words are often shields. We talk to fill silence. We explain to feel safe. We speak just to avoid awkwardness, to protect ourselves from feeling too visible. But when one person chooses silence, they force everyone else to sit in the rawness of the moment. And that moment, it reveals everything. Who's insecure, who's pretending, who's addicted to attention, and who's silently watching. Modern psychology supports this. People who are deeply uncomfortable with silence are usually uncomfortable with themselves. They don't fear the empty space because it's empty. They fear it because it echoes. It forces their inner world to speak back to them. And this is what Nietzsche understood so well. Silence is not passive. It is aggressive in its clarity. Let's take it out of the abstract and into the real world. Look at elite interrogators. They don't press with constant questions. They use silence, because once the words stop, the suspect begins to unravel. The quiet becomes unbearable, a vacuum that demands to be filled, or consider powerful leaders. Think of someone like Vladimir Putin. He doesn't need to yell. He rarely explains. He just waits, staring still, letting the silence make others uncomfortable. His silence says, "I don't need to show strength. You'll feel it." Even in fiction, take Don Draper from Mad Men, rarely emotional, rarely reactive. But when he speaks, people listen, not because he's loud, but because his silence makes every word heavier. Now contrast that with the man who argues all day on Twitter, the one who needs a reaction, who can't sleep until his opinion is seen, liked, validated. That man is loud, but he is not powerful. His noise is proof of his emptiness. His endless opinions are evidence of his lack of clarity. Nietzsche's silent archetype doesn't play that game. He doesn't explain himself to others, because he's already explained himself to himself. His silence is not cold. It is controlled. It is built on inner certainty, and nothing terrifies the uncertain more than someone who does not flinch, because silence reveals the cracks in their armor. It strips away their ability to hide behind performance. And in that moment, they are naked, stripped of their defenses, laid bare, not because of anything you said, but because of what you didn't. They fear you, not for your words, but for your unreadability. They can't anticipate your next move. They can't control your rhythm. They can't predict your energy, and unpredictability is power. So the next time someone pushes for a reaction, pause, breathe. Let the silence speak for you. Then watch them shift, squirm, unravel, under the weight of what you didn't say. Because in a world obsessed with dominance, with louder voices, bigger platforms, faster opinions, Nietzsche gave us something radically different. He gave us the will to power. But here's the truth. Most people miss. The will to power isn't about crushing others. It's not about shouting louder, arguing harder, or asserting yourself through brute force. At its core, it's about mastery of the self. It's about self-overcoming, taming your impulses, disciplining your desires, channeling your energy inward until it builds, condenses, and becomes unshakable. That's where silence becomes dangerous. Because silence is not the absence of power. It's the containment of it. It's the quiet chamber where power is refined, focused, sharpened. Stillness is not weakness, it's concentration. Nietzsche didn't tell you to chase attention. He told you to transform yourself, to become the kind of person who doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard, because their presence already says enough. There's a reason Nietzsche didn't write long manifestos or deliver hour-long lectures. He used aphorisms, sharp, explosive, surgical, each sentence a blade, like, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." That's not just wisdom, that's a weapon. Minimal, precise, penetrating, just like the kind of silence Nietzsche admired. This is the same principle behind true power, not chaos, not noise, but focus and restraint, because silence is not just passive, it's strategic. You can use silence to unsettle an enemy, to assert dominance without raising a hand, to test a person's mind. See how long they last without praise, without validation, without your attention. Stillness isn't just a pause. It's an interrogation technique, a negotiation tactic, a spiritual discipline. When you speak, you reveal. But when you stay silent, you observe. And observation is the first step to control. Now think of this in modern terms, in a world where people tweet every thought, where influencers monetize every moment of vulnerability, where everyone performs authenticity but never stops talking. The one who says nothing, who sits with himself, who refines his own being, who acts only when necessary, that person becomes mythic. Why? Because stillness creates mystery, and mystery creates power. This is the will to power, expressed through non-action, a kind of spiritual resistance, the ability to say, I do not owe you my energy, I do not need to be understood, I am not afraid of being unknown. And that, the herd cannot stand, because the herd survives on feedback, on affirmation, on shared signals of belonging. But the Nietzschean individual, the one becoming the Übermensch, he speaks less and becomes more. That's the paradox. The less you say, the more they feel. The quieter you become, the more they project onto you. And that projection, that's power. You are no longer just a man. You are a symbol, a riddle, a question they can't answer. And in that question lies your control. So ask yourself, do you want to be loud or do you want to be felt? Do you want attention or do you want influence? Because the will to power is not about performing strength. It's about becoming so centered, so grounded in your mission that nothing, not silence, not solitude, not misunderstanding, can shake you. That is the final form of mastery. The ability to move through the world quietly and still bend it around your will. But here's the problem. Society doesn't understand this kind of power. Instead, it assigns lazy labels. He's shy. She's awkward. They must be insecure. Because if you're not loud, if you're not constantly explaining yourself, if you're not visible, something must be wrong with you. But Nietzsche would have laughed at that. To him, quietness wasn't a flaw. It was a form of refinement, not passivity, but selectivity. In a world addicted to sound, the person who chooses silence is not failing to speak. They are refusing to waste words. Today we are conditioned to explain everything, to post every thought, to comment on every issue, to share every moment, to perform transparency 24/7, as if holding anything back makes you suspicious or weak. But Nietzsche's worldview flips that. He believed, the more grounded a person is, the less they need to speak, the less they owe the world their inner life. Because true self-possession doesn't beg to be seen, it simply is. Society misunderstands quiet people because it fears what it cannot read. And Nietzsche understood this at his core. He once said, invisible threads are the strongest ties. And it's the silent person who holds those threads, while the rest of the world flails, grasping for attention, scrambling for relevance. The quiet one watches. Waits, calculates. They don't speak to fill space. They speak when it matters, and that is what makes them dangerous. Because society assumes that if you're not talking, you must be unsure. But often, it's the opposite. You're not unsure. You're unimpressed. You're not lost. You're just not interested in playing their game. Think about it. In meetings, the person who talks the most is often the least informed. In arguments, the loudest one is usually the least secure. On social media, the most reactive users are the easiest to manipulate. But the quiet ones, the ones who pause, who listen, who reflect, they carry a different kind of gravity, psychological gravity. And Nietzsche would say, that's not weakness, That's a different kind of strength. But modern life doesn't know what to do with strength that isn't flashy. It wants declarations. It wants hashtags. It wants speeches and virality. It wants your soul on display. But silence? Silence doesn't give that. Silence protects the soul, and that's the great misunderstanding. Quiet people are not behind. They're ahead. So far ahead, they don't need to announce it. They've already seen through the performance. They've already chosen depth over attention. And in a world drowning in noise, that choice is nothing short of revolutionary. Most people feel the urge to respond immediately, to explain, to defend, to fill the space with words, any words, just to avoid sitting in uncertainty. But true power lives in the pause. Let the silence breathe. Let it expand. Let others squirm inside it. Let them rush to fill the gap. And then, watch what they reveal. Because silence does two things. It exposes others, and it elevates you. Picture a confrontation. Instead of reacting with emotion, you stay calm. You hold your posture. You say, nothing. And in that stillness, something shifts. Suddenly, they're the one unraveling. Because silence throws the insecure off balance. It denies them the feedback loop they crave. They need a response to anchor their performance. And when they don't get it, their monologue collapses, turning them into a caricature of their own drama. Nietzsche didn't just write about silence. He lived it. His aphorisms were brief, sharp, surgical. He wasn't trying to comfort you. He wanted to cut through you with minimal words. That's the key. Don't explain everything. Mystery is power. The more you reveal, the more predictable you become. And Nietzsche believed, the strong individual is never fully readable. This isn't about manipulation. It's about self-possession. You don't owe your inner world to everyone. Let them wonder. Let them project. Let your silence become a mirror, and their reaction will tell you everything. So how do you build this stillness? How do you develop this quiet gravity? Not through noise, not through performance, but through solitude. Take time to be alone, write, reflect, not for social media, not for validation, but for clarity. Ask yourself, where am I reactive? Where do I feel the urge to explain, to prove, to perform? Then, let that urge die. Because as Nietzsche said, become who you are, not who the world trained you to be, not who the crowd accepts, but the real you, the one beneath the noise. And that version of you? He doesn't need to shout. He walks into a room and says nothing, because everything about him already says, I know who I am. In the end, Nietzsche's silent figure is not shy. He's not passive. He's precise, detached, sharp, like a blade that never needs to be unsheathed. In a world that rewards noise, constant posting, and compulsive oversharing, silence becomes an act of rebellion. It says, I don't need your approval. Don't fear your misunderstanding. I have already mastered myself. You're just catching up, and that is terrifying. People will mock you. They'll label you cold, arrogant, difficult, not because you are, but because they can't read you, and what they can't read, they can't control. You'll make people uncomfortable, not by yelling, but by watching, not by fighting, but by not reacting. Because silence is not absence. It's presence, intensified. It's the power of a mind that doesn't need to announce itself. It waits. And when it acts, it's decisive, unstoppable, final. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong in this noisy world, Good. Maybe you weren't born to be loud. Maybe you were born to be unshakable, be silent, and let them feel it. If this message cut deeper than expected, if you felt seen in ways you can't quite explain, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Here we don't follow the noise. We go deeper, every single time.